Picture this. You're a king. Not a king of a golden palace. Not a king with a powerful army. You're a king hiding in a swamp, dressed as a peasant, eating whatever you can hunt, with fewer than 12 men around you. Your kingdom no longer exists on paper. Your cities have been burned. Your nobles are dead or have fled to the continent. And the army that destroyed all of it is just a few kilometers away, celebrating, believing the conquest is already over. That was the winter of the year 878 after Christ. And the man hiding in that swamp, surrounded by stagnant water and reeds, was about to become the only king in English history to receive the title the Great. But to understand how he ended up there, hidden, defeated, on the verge of disappearing from history as just another forgotten name, you have to go back almost 100 years, to the moment when the first longships appeared on the horizon and England discovered a kind of warfare it had never faced before. The Vikings did not arrive as an organized army. They arrived like isolated storms. In 793, a monastery on the island of Lindisfarne, on the northeast coast of England, was attacked by surprise. The monks had no defense. They had no reason to have one. Monasteries were places of prayer, not war. The raiders killed, stole whatever was of value, and vanished back to the sea before any response could be organized. A chronicler of the time wrote that he never imagined such an attack was possible, that terror had arrived from a place no one was watching, the North Sea. That was only the beginning. Over the following decades, the attacks became more frequent, bolder, more coordinated. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of England, divided among Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia, treated each raid as an isolated event, a summer storm that passed and left destruction behind, but that eventually faded. They still did not understand they were facing something different. These were not storms. They were waves from a sea that was never going to stop hitting the shore. In 865, that changed for good. A great Viking army, which Anglo-Saxon chroniclers would call the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia. These were not isolated bands of raiders looking for silver and slaves to carry back home. These were thousands of warriors, organized under leadership that the Scandinavians themselves respected, arriving with the declared intention of conquering land, not just stealing wealth. The difference is fundamental. A raider wants to grab what he can and run. Conqueror wants to stay. The great army advanced through England with an efficiency none of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms could match. Northumbria fell in 866 and 867. The Vikings took York, the capital, and established their own kingdom there that would survive for decades. East Anglia fell soon after. King Edmund, who refused to convert or submit, was captured and, according to the tradition that formed afterward, brutally executed, tied to a tree and used as target practice for arrows until he died. The Anglo-Saxons turned Edmund into a martyr and a saint. But the practical message to the other kingdoms was simpler and far more terrifying. Resistance had a price, and that price was paid in blood. Mercia was next. In 874, the Mercian king was forced into exile and the Vikings installed a puppet ruler in his place, someone who would pay tribute and obey. 3 of the 4 great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had been destroyed, absorbed, or subjugated in less than 10 years. Only Wessex remained, in the south of England. And Wessex, at that moment, was ruled by a king named Athelred, with a younger brother named Alfred fighting at his side. Alfred was not the expected heir. He was the 4th son of the previous king, Ethelwulf. Under normal circumstances, he would never have reached the throne. But the circumstances of 9th century England were anything but normal. His older brothers died one after another, some in battle against the Vikings themselves, others from natural causes in an age when simply reaching the age of 30 was already a victory. When Athelred died in 871, after years of facing constant Viking incursions, Alfred, around 22 years old, became king of Wessex. He inherited a kingdom in permanent war, the last independent Anglo-Saxon stronghold on an island that was being redrawn by men from the north with axes and ships. The first years of Alfred's reign were pure survival. He fought battles, some small victories, several painful defeats, and eventually bought time by paying tribute to the Vikings so they would temporarily withdraw from Wessex. It was a humiliating strategy, but a pragmatic one. Buying time was not cowardice, it was calculation. Except the time bought never lasted long enough. The Vikings always came back, always with more strength, always testing whether Wessex had already weakened enough to fall like the other three kingdoms. And that is exactly what happened in early January of 878. A Viking detachment led by a chief named Guthrum attacked Wessex in the dead of winter, at a moment no medieval army would normally choose to launch a campaign. Winter was the resting season, when armies gathered supplies and waited for spring. Guthrum broke that rule on purpose. He struck exactly when no one expected it, catching Alfred's royal court almost completely off guard, in a place called Chippenham. The attack was so sudden and so devastating that it destroyed Wessex's organized capacity for resistance almost overnight. Nobles were killed or fled. Some submitted to the Vikings, accepting to live under Danish rule in exchange for their own lives. The kingdom, already the last free Anglo-Saxon stronghold in England, seemed one step away from vanishing completely from the map, exactly like Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia before it. And Alfred, the king who should have been leading the resistance, disappeared. Not in battle, not in a glorious retreat, but hidden, with a small group of loyal followers, in the marshes of Somerset, in a region known as Athelney. It was an isolated place, surrounded by water, reeds, and boggy ground that made any approach slow and dangerous. It was also, for those same reasons, almost invisible. The legends that formed afterward, about Alfred disguised as a peasant, tending some cakes on a fire in a cottage and being scolded by a woman who did not know who he was, may or may not contain real elements. But the core of the story is no legend at all. The King of Wessex, heir to a lineage going back centuries, was literally hiding in a swamp, his kingdom overrun, his court scattered, and Guthrum's Viking army controlling open territory with no organized opposition. For months, that was the state of things. Winter moving towards spring, Alfred in the swamp, quietly rebuilding a network of support among the loyal men of Wessex who had not yet submitted. He was not idle. He was watching, planning, waiting for the right moment. And more importantly, he was understanding something the other Anglo-Saxon kings had never grasped in time. That facing the Vikings in open field, in the traditional way, battle after battle, was a losing strategy. The rules of the entire game had to change. But what no one in Wessex expected, neither the nobles who had submitted nor the Vikings themselves who controlled the territory, was that the man hiding in the swamp was only a few months away from gathering an army, winning a battle that would change the fate of England forever, and then doing something even more radical, building a defense system so intelligent it would make it impossible for any Viking army to repeat what Guthrum had done at Chippenham. In the spring of 878, something began to stir in the marshes of Somerset. Alfred had spent months in silence, but not in idleness. He had sent messengers to the loyal local leaders of Wessex, men who had not yet submitted to Guthrum, men who were waiting for a signal. The signal came in May. Alfred left Athelney and summoned the army of Wessex at a place called Egbert's Stone, on the border between Somerset and Wiltshire. What showed up at that gathering surprised even the most optimistic. Nobles, free farmers, warriors who had been hiding in the woods for months, all converged on the meeting point in numbers no one had predicted. The chronicles record that there was joy at the reunion, that the men wept at seeing the king alive. But Alfred had no time for emotion. He had a battle to fight, and it needed to happen before Guthrum found out what was being organized. Speed was everything. The army of Wessex marched for 2 days and found the Vikings at Edington, in Wiltshire. The Battle of Edington in 878 was fought in a way the Vikings did not expect. Alfred did not retreat, did not try to maneuver, did not play the light cavalry game the Scandinavians dominated. He formed a tight shield wall, the Anglo-Saxon infantry line, and advanced straight at Guthrum's army with constant pressure and rigid discipline. It was brutal, it was slow, and it worked. The Vikings were pushed back into their own fortified camp. Alfred did not lift the siege. He stayed there for 2 weeks, cutting off the supply of food and water until Guthrum, with no other option, asked to negotiate. What happened after Edington matters just as much as the battle itself. Alfred did not destroy Guthrum. He did not execute him, did not publicly humiliate him. He negotiated a treaty that split England into 2 zones, Wessex and the Allied territories in the south and west, and the Danelaw, the Viking territory in the north and east. And then he did something no one had ever done before with a defeated Viking chief. He offered Guthrum Christian baptism, with Alfred himself serving as godfather at the ceremony. Guthrum accepted. This was not naive generosity. It was calculated politics. A Christian Guthrum, with Alfred as godfather, was symbolically bound to Wessex in a way a defeated pagan Guthrum never would be. Alfred had turned a beaten enemy into a nominal ally, and he had bought time to do what really mattered. Because Edington was a victory, but Alfred knew with absolute clarity that a victory in open field did not solve the structural problem. The Vikings would come back. They always did. What had changed in Wessex between 865 and 878 was not enough to guarantee the next invasion would end differently from the last one. To truly change that, the very geography of the kingdom had to change. Something had to be built. The system Alfred designed in the years following the Battle of Edington has a simple name in the historical record: strongholds. But the word does not capture the scale or the intelligence of what was actually done. These were not just walls on a hill. It was a network, an interconnected system of defensive points spread across the territory of Wessex with a precise geographic logic that very few medieval rulers would have been capable of conceiving, let alone executing. The central idea was this: no point in Wessex should be more than 30-odd kilometers from a b. 30 kilometers was the distance an infantry army could march in a single day. That meant any Viking incursion into Wessex territory, in any direction, would find a fortified point within a day's march. And Viking cavalry, without enough heavy infantry to take defended earth and timber walls, would be stopped in its tracks. The Buzz were not just isolated defensive points. They were urban centers. Alfred understood something that would transform England for centuries to come. Strongholds generate towns. A permanent garrison needs blacksmiths, bakers, merchants, craftsmen. Merchants attract markets. Markets attract population. Alfred was building a defensive network and, at the same time, creating the urban backbone of medieval England. The document that survives to this day, known as the Burghall Heidige, records 30 Buzz spread across Wessex and allied Mercia, each with its own garrison, each with its own area of territorial responsibility. The system was funded by a territorial tax calculated with remarkable precision. Each hide of land, the agricultural unit of the time, supported a fixed number of warriors to man the walls. It was bureaucracy in service of defense, something Western Europe of that period rarely saw with such clarity. But there was another factor the Vikings had not anticipated, one Alfred had noticed while watching the raids of previous years. The Scandinavians relied on rivers to move quickly through the interior. Their longships could sail up the Thames, the Severn, the Yxe, penetrating hundreds of kilometers inland without ever needing to land and march. It was that river mobility that made raiders so hard to intercept. Alfred blocked the rivers. Buzz were specifically positioned at the banks and confluences of Wessex's main rivers. Two Buzz on opposite sides of a crossing created a choke point no ship could pass without being attacked from both banks at once. The mobility that had been the Vikings' decisive advantage was being systematically eliminated, not through battles, but through architecture and geography. And the Vikings, without knowing it yet, were about to discover what it means to attack a kingdom that learned from its own mistakes. In 892, 14 years after Edington, a new great Viking fleet arrived on the southern coast of England. This was not a raiding party. It was a force of conquest estimated at more than 250 ships, coming from continental Europe where it had been defeated by the Franks. These were experienced warriors, landless, looking for somewhere to settle. And England had worked before. Why wouldn't it work again? What they found in 892 was unrecognizable compared to the kingdom Guthrum had swept through in 878. Every river blocked, every strategic position garrisoned, an army that did not need to be raised from scratch because a permanent defensive structure existed that functioned independently of any single battle. The campaign from 892 to 896 lasted 4 years. The Vikings marched, tried to take Buzz, were repelled, tried to go around, were pursued. No significant town fell. No strategic point was permanently taken. In the end, unable to establish safe bases and without achieving any real strategic objective, the great fleet broke apart. Some warriors settled in the existing Danelaw. Others returned to the continent. The invasion that had seemed threatening enough to repeat the disaster of 878 had been absorbed by the system Alfred had built, tested, and left running. Alfred died in 899 after Christ. He was around 50 years old, which for the time was already a long life for a man who had spent decades on campaign. He did not live to see the final conclusion of the story he had started. His son Edward the Elder and his granddaughter Ethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, would continue expanding the Buz northward, reconquering the Danelaw piece by piece over the following decades, until a grandson of Alfred named Athelstan became, in 927, the first king of a unified England. But the foundation belonged to Alfred, a man who had lost his kingdom in a single January night, who had hidden in a swamp for months, and who had used that time not to mourn, but to understand what had gone wrong and how to build something that would not fail the same way again. The stone and earth of the Buz had achieved what no army in open field ever could, making the cost of invading Wessex too high for any Viking force to sustain. The Athelney Marsh where Alfred hid still exists today, on a low plain in Somerset, England. It is a quiet place, with birds and reeds and still water. Hard to imagine that from there came the man who changed the fate of an entire island. But that is exactly the point. The greatest turning points in history rarely begin in palaces. They begin in places where no one is watching, with people everyone else has already given up on taking seriously. If you enjoyed this video and this story taught you something, subscribe and like the video, because the next story is even more interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.